It was a blazing summer day in the ancient city of Pella, the capital of the Macedonian kingdom, where the streets buzzed with the sounds of merchants, bargaining, and children playing. The stone-paved roads shimmered under the relentless heat, and the air was thick with the scents of fresh bread and wild herbs. Within the fortified palace walls, far from the bustle of the marketplace, a momentous event was about to change history forever. Olympias, Queen of Macedon and wife to King Philip II, was in labor. She was about to give birth to a child who would come to shape the world as no other had before him. Alexander. Olympias was no ordinary woman. Fiercely intelligent and deeply spiritual, she claimed divine ancestry, tracing her bloodline back to the legendary Achilles, the great hero of the Trojan War. But her conviction went beyond mere legend. She believed that her son was not merely royal, but divine. According to her, the god Zeus himself had visited her in the guise of a serpent, fathering Alexander in a sacred union between mortal and deity. From his earliest days, Alexander's extraordinary nature was unmistakable. As a toddler, he showed signs of bravery and a restless mind. He was curious about everything, asking endless questions and showing a hunger for knowledge that his tutors struggled to satisfy. His childhood was marked by lessons not only in reading and writing, but also in philosophy, warfare, and leadership. But perhaps the most famous story from his youth is his taming of Bucephalus, a wild and untamable horse that no one else could ride. At just 10 years old, Alexander observed that the horse was frightened of its own shadow. By cleverly turning Bucephalus to face the sun, he calmed the creature, earning the respect and awe of those around him. This event foreshadowed the extraordinary ability Alexander would have to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. King Philip II, Alexander's father, was a formidable man with grand ambitions. Having transformed Macedonia from a fragmented land into a powerful kingdom through war and diplomacy, Philip sought to expand his realm even further. He dreamed of conquering the vast Persian Empire, a dream that would soon pass to his son. Though proud of Alexander, Philip was wary of his son's fierce ambition and unpredictable nature. He often warned him, "Seek a kingdom equal to yourself. Macedonia is too small for you." Under the tutelage of Aristotle, one of the greatest minds of the era, Alexander's education flourished. Aristotle taught him philosophy, ethics, politics, and science, instilling in him a deep respect for knowledge and a desire to question everything. These lessons would later guide Alexander as he sought to unify diverse peoples and cultures under his expanding empire. When Alexander was just 16, Philip made him regent during his absence on a military campaign. The young prince proved himself capable, quelling rebellions and managing the kingdom's affairs with maturity beyond his years. At 18, following the sudden assassination of King Philip during a festival, Alexander ascended the throne amidst uncertainty and turmoil. Many doubted whether this young man could hold together a fractured kingdom and lead an ambitious campaign against Persia, but Alexander did not hesitate. With a ruthless efficiency, he crushed internal rebellions, sending a clear message to both his subjects and enemies. He was the rightful king, and his rule would be absolute. In the city of Thebes, which had dared to revolt, Alexander ordered the city burned to the ground, demonstrating that defiance would not be tolerated. His eyes then turned eastward. The Persian Empire, vast and wealthy, was ripe for conquest. Alexander gathered an army of 40,000 men, soldiers trained for war, loyal to their king, and eager for glory. Crossing the narrow strait of the Hellespont into Asia Minor, he began the campaign that would rewrite the history of the known world. At the ancient city of Troy, Alexander performed a ritual sacrifice to honor Achilles, the hero to whom his mother claimed descent. This was a symbolic act, binding his personal destiny to the legendary past and signaling his intention to carve out a legacy that would last for eternity. The battles that followed were fierce and decisive. At the Granicus River, Alexander led his men into battle, narrowly escaping death himself. His tactics were bold and innovative, often turning the tide against vastly larger Persian forces. At the Battle of Ezus, he confronted King Darius III face to face. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Alexander's skill and bravery won the day, forcing Darius to flee and leaving his family in Alexander's hands. Unlike many conquerors, Alexander showed clemency toward Darius's family, treating them with respect and honor. This gesture was both political and personal. He sought not only to dominate, but to unite. His reputation as a leader who combined strength with magnanimity began to spread. In Egypt, Alexander was hailed as a liberator. He visited the Oracle of Amun at the Siwa oasis, where priests reportedly recognized him as a son of a god. This divine confirmation strengthened Alexander's belief in his destiny and fueled his ambition further. Founding the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast, he established a beacon of Hellenistic culture that would endure for centuries. But the conquest was far from over. The vast Persian heartland lay ahead, and Alexander was determined to claim it. The unforgiving sun blazed down on the vast plains near Gaugamela, a place soon to be etched into the annals of history. The Persian army stretched out like a living sea of humanity. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, chariots fitted with scythe blades, armored cavalry, and even towering war elephants. King Darius III had mustered the largest force the ancient world had ever witnessed, determined to crush the Macedonian invader once and for all. Opposite this seemingly endless wave of might stood Alexander, with just 47,000 men. His forces were smaller, but they burned with a fierce determination and loyalty that only a true leader could inspire. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. The fate of empires would be decided on this dusty battlefield. Before the battle commenced, Alexander rode among his troops, speaking to them with a calm yet powerful voice. Calling each soldier by name, he reminded them that their fight was not merely for wealth or glory, but for their place in the tapestry of history. His presence sparked courage and unity, turning ordinary men into an unstoppable force. As dawn broke, the battle erupted in a thunderous clash. The Macedonian phalanx, with its long spears and tight formations, stood firm against the Persian cavalry charges. But Alexander's true genius was in his strategy, a brilliant, daring maneuver that would become legendary. Leading his cavalry on a sweeping diagonal charge, Alexander pulled the Persian forces out of formation, creating a gap in their lines. Seizing the moment, he charged directly toward Darius himself. The Persian king, seeing his army falter, fled the battlefield in panic, abandoning his troops and sealing his fate. The victory at Gaugamela shattered the Persian Empire's backbone. Alexander marched triumphantly into Babylon, greeted by crowds cheering his name. Yet despite his conquest, Alexander did not impose harsh rule. Instead, he adopted many Persian customs, wearing royal robes and sitting upon the golden throne, signaling a new era where East and West might be united. This decision was not without controversy. Some of his Macedonian companions viewed it as betrayal, fearing the loss of their own traditions and power. But Alexander's vision was clear: to meld cultures and create a lasting empire, not just to conquer and destroy. In pursuit of the fleeing Darius, Alexander crossed treacherous mountains and arid deserts. Eventually, Darius was betrayed by his own satrap, Bessus, who struck him down and left him to die. When Alexander found the dying king, he was overcome not with triumph, but with sorrow. He ensured Darius received a royal funeral and vowed to avenge his death by hunting down Bessus. This act further blurred the line between conqueror and noble ruler in Alexander's complex character. In the years that followed, Alexander's rule became increasingly complicated. He married Roxana, a princess from the eastern region of Bactria, forging political alliances through marriage. He encouraged his officers to wed local women as well, blending Macedonian and Persian cultures. He founded numerous cities named Alexandria, each serving as a beacon of Hellenistic culture and governance in far-flung territories. These cities were more than military strongholds. They were centers of learning, trade, and cultural exchange. However, tensions within his ranks began to rise. Alexander introduced the Persian custom of proskynesis, bowing before the king, a practice many Macedonians saw as an affront to their freedom and values. This cultural friction culminated tragically when Alexander, in a fit of drunken rage, killed his longtime friend and general Clitus. The incident haunted him deeply, revealing the toll his ambition and growing god complex took on his psyche. Alexander increasingly saw himself as more than a mortal king. He declared himself divine, claiming descent not only from Zeus, but asserting his own godhood. He sent envoys to Greece demanding recognition of this status, which some cities accepted, while others resisted. The path to empire was paved with both awe-inspiring victories and deep personal struggles. Alexander's sands of conquest stretched ever onward, carving out a new world order. Persepolis stood as a majestic crown jewel atop the vast Persian Empire, a city that shimmered with the brilliance of gold and marble, its grand halls echoing with the footsteps of emperors past. For centuries, the city had been a symbol of Persian might and cultural achievement, its walls adorned with carvings that narrated the glory of kings like Cyrus the Great, Darius, and Xerxes. As Alexander's army approached, the sheer scale of the city and the weight of its history were impossible to ignore. Upon entering Persepolis, Alexander was struck by a mixture of awe and reverence. The soldiers, too, were silenced by the city's beauty. Massive columns decorated with intricate bas-reliefs, vast courtyards, and sprawling palaces that spoke of an empire at its peak. Alexander ordered his men to treat the city and its inhabitants with respect. He sought to preserve the treasures and culture, recognizing that his conquest was not just about land, but about legacy. But the underlying tension between conqueror and conquered lingered like a shadow. The Persian Empire had long been a fierce rival to the Greeks and Macedonians, and the wounds of previous conflicts, especially the burning of Athens during the Persian Wars, were still raw in the minds of many. One evening, at a lavish feast held in the city's palace, the air was thick with wine and heated conversation. Thais, a renowned courtesan, known for her sharp wit and fiery spirit, stood and addressed the guests with a passionate speech. She reminded them of the centuries of conflict and the destruction wrought by the Persians upon Greek cities. Her words stirred the crowd's emotions, igniting a sense of vengeance and justice. Moved by the fervor and the momentum of the moment, Alexander seized a burning torch. His companions, swept up by his leadership and the intoxicating atmosphere, followed him as he set fire to the grand wooden palace of Persepolis. Flames rapidly engulfed the structure, roaring through the night and sending thick plumes of smoke into the sky. The destruction was swift and brutal. The city's majestic halls, once filled with the echoes of royal decrees and ceremonies, were reduced to ashes. For many, the burning of Persepolis was a cathartic act, a symbolic end to Persian dominance, and a fierce message to all who might oppose Alexander's rule. Historians continue to debate the true motivations behind this act. Some suggest it was a calculated political statement meant to solidify Alexander's claim as the rightful heir to the Persian throne, severing ties with the old empire through destruction. Others argue it was a spontaneous decision born of fatigue, frustration, and the chaos of conquest. Regardless of the cause, the fall of Persepolis marked a critical turning point. Alexander's empire was no longer just a collection of conquered lands. It was a fusion of cultures, ambitions, and shifting loyalties. Beyond Persepolis lay lands even more foreign and challenging, rugged mountains, vast deserts, and nomadic tribes who would not submit easily. Alexander crossed the Oxus River, entering the realms of Central Asia, where the harsh landscape tested every ounce of endurance in his troops. His army faced guerrilla tactics and constant ambushes, forcing Alexander to adapt his strategies to unfamiliar and hostile environments. The prolonged campaign wore heavily on both the men and their leader. The strains of continuous warfare bred suspicion within the ranks. Alexander's trust in his closest generals wavered, and paranoia took root in his mind. Accusations of betrayal and plots became frequent, leading to purges and executions. The camaraderie that once defined his army was eroding. Yet even amid these struggles, the myth of Alexander grew. Tales of his bravery, tactical genius, and apparent invincibility spread far and wide. He was lauded as a hero in some cities, while branded a ruthless despot in others. But all agreed on one thing: Alexander was a force of history, reshaping the known world. As the dust settled over Persepolis and the campaign pushed forward into the unknown, it became clear that Alexander was no longer just a king or a general. He was a legend in the making, a man whose ambitions would echo through the ages, long after the fires had died down. After the fiery destruction of Persepolis, Alexander's ambition burned brighter than ever. His eyes were fixed on the east, beyond the familiar lands of Persia and Media, toward the vast and mysterious territories of India. The lands that lay beyond the Indus River were said to be wild, inhabited by fierce tribes and legendary beasts, a place where no Macedonian had ever set foot. Crossing the Indus was no small feat. The river itself was a mighty obstacle, swollen by monsoon rains and guarded by armies who fiercely resisted his advance. But Alexander was relentless. He ordered the construction of massive bridges and boats, engineering marvels for their time, to ferry his troops and horses safely across the turbulent waters. Once on Indian soil, Alexander encountered a world unlike any he had known. The dense jungles buzzed with unfamiliar sounds, strange animals roamed freely, and the people he met wore vibrant clothes and spoke in languages that twisted his tongue. He was fascinated but undeterred. The local rulers did not welcome the Macedonians with open arms. Instead, they launched fierce resistance. One of the most formidable opponents was King Porus, a warrior who ruled the region between the Hydas and Aeacines rivers. Porus was not just a king, he was a legend towering in stature, riding a massive war elephant, and commanding a well-trained army. The Battle of the Hydaspes was brutal and hard-fought. You're exposed to the Suicide and years of campaigning and unfamiliar with war elephants, faced an enemy who used the terrain and animals to his advantage. The battle lasted days, with bloodshed staining the river red. Alexander himself was at the front lines, directing the battle with the precision and courage that had made him a legend. In the end, Alexander emerged victorious, but the cost was high. Many soldiers were wounded or killed, and the challenges of this foreign land weighed heavily on the army's morale. Despite this, Alexander treated King Porus with respect, impressed by his bravery and leadership. He reinstated Porus as a regional governor, securing loyalty through diplomacy as much as through conquest. But even as victories piled up, Alexander's men began to falter. The endless campaigns, the harsh climates, the strange customs, and the distance from home wore on their spirits. At the Beas River, they refused to march further east, weary and longing for their families. Faced with this mutiny, Alexander had no choice but to turn back. It was a moment of bitter disappointment for a man who had dreamed of conquering the entire known world. Yet his journey eastward had reshaped the map and opened new corridors of trade, culture, and exchange that would ripple through history. On the return journey, Alexander's army faced new hardships, monsoon storms, treacherous mountain passes, and hostile tribes. The grueling march tested their endurance and loyalty. Some of Alexander's closest companions fell ill or died. The man who once seemed invincible was now a leader fighting against the limits of mortality and human will. As they finally crossed back into Persia and marched toward Babylon, Alexander's health began to decline. The weight of his empire, his dreams, and his enemies pressed heavily on him. Yet his mind remained sharp, plotting new strategies and visions for a world united under his rule. The Indian campaign was a turning point. It marked the furthest reach of Alexander's conquests, but also exposed the limits of even the greatest ambitions. It was a testament to his genius and his humanity, a complex mix of triumph, tragedy, and the endless quest for meaning beyond the horizon. After returning from the grueling and exhausting campaign in India, Alexander's vast empire stretched from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean all the way to the distant lands of the Indian subcontinent. This vastness, while a testament to his military genius and indomitable spirit, was also its greatest vulnerability. The immense diversity of peoples, languages, and cultures within his empire presented challenges that even Alexander, with all his talents, struggled to control. Despite the growing unrest and fatigue among his troops, many of whom longed for home after years of endless marching, fighting, and hardship, Alexander himself remained driven by an insatiable desire to push forward. He was consumed by visions of a unified world, a fusion of East and West where Greek philosophy mingled with Persian royal traditions and Indian spiritual wisdom. He dreamed of an empire where cultures blended and borders were erased in the name of progress and harmony. In Babylon, the splendid city he had come to regard as his capital and symbolic center of power, Alexander planned new campaigns. Rumors spread of his ambitions to conquer Arabia and even parts of Africa. He envisaged building grand cities and infrastructure that would link his empire from end to end. He married Stathira, daughter of the late Persian king Darius, and arranged further marriages among his officers and local princesses, hoping to solidify alliances and create a new aristocracy that transcended old ethnic divisions. Yet the years of relentless campaigns, wounds sustained in battle, and excessive drinking had severely weakened Alexander's health. The once invincible warrior was now vulnerable to illness. In 323 BCE, at the age of just 32, Alexander fell gravely ill in his palace in Babylon. The exact nature of his illness remains a mystery, debated by historians and medical experts alike. Some speculate malaria, typhoid, or even poisoning. As his condition worsened, his closest generals and friends gathered at his bedside, watching helplessly as the man who had conquered the known world slipped away. His mind remained sharp, but his body failed him. In those final days, Alexander reportedly spoke cryptic words, leaving no clear instructions about succession. The phrase "to the strongest" became his enigmatic last command, leaving the future of his empire shrouded in uncertainty. With no designated heir capable of ruling, the unity Alexander had forged began to unravel almost immediately after his death. The empire, held together for so long by his overwhelming presence and leadership, fractured into rival factions. His generals, known as the Diadochi, waged bitter wars to claim portions of the empire for themselves. Macedonia, Egypt under Ptolemy, Persia under Seleucus, and other regions all became separate kingdoms, marking the end of Alexander's dream of a unified world. However, the cultural legacy Alexander left behind was profound and lasting. The period known as the Hellenistic Age saw an unprecedented exchange of ideas, art, science, and religion across the vast territories he had conquered. Greek language and customs spread far beyond their original borders, influencing local cultures and creating a cosmopolitan world where scholars, traders, and artists mingled freely. The city of Alexandria in Egypt became the crown jewel of this cultural flowering, a vibrant hub of learning, home to the legendary Library of Alexandria and the Great Lighthouse, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Scholars such as Euclid and Eratosthenes would build foundations of knowledge that resonate to this day. Alexander's story itself became legend. Tales of his divine parentage, his fearless battles, and his tragic youth captivated the imaginations of generations. He was lionized as a god king, a man whose ambitions touched the heavens, but whose mortality reminded the world of human fragility. His life poses timeless questions about the nature of power, ambition, and legacy. Was he a visionary who changed the course of history, or a reckless conqueror whose empire was doomed to collapse? The answer is complex. What remains undeniable is that Alexander the Great reshaped the ancient world in ways that still echo in modern culture, politics, and thought. As the sun set on his life in Babylon, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. The legacy Alexander left was neither complete empire nor stable kingdom, but a world transformed, a vision of unity and diversity intertwined. In that final moment, the man who had conquered so much was remembered not just as a king or warrior, but as a force that changed the destiny of humanity forever.